Carlotta is coming back in Wuthering Waves version 2.6, but after all this time, is Carlotta still as good as she always has been, and is she still worth pulling for? That's what I'm going to be talking about in today's video, by discussing Carlotta's biggest pros and cons. The first thing I want to talk about with Carlotta is that Carlotta is a ranged character. Now, why is it important that a character is ranged? Well, the most obvious answer would be because it allows her to hit literally every single type of enemy in the game. That's kind of an obvious reason. It doesn't matter if they're flying or if they're far away, Carlotta will be able to hit the enemy, and that's very nice. But that's not the only reason why being a ranged character is very nice. Being a ranged character also gives Carlotta the capability to position herself anywhere on the battlefield. Now, why is this important for Carlotta specifically? Carlotta's AoE is rather lacking, being one of the less good ones we've seen in recent times. However, because Carlotta is a ranged character and is capable of putting herself anywhere on the arena that she wants, she's capable of lining herself up correctly so that her straight up horizontal blasts during her ultimate will be able to hit as many enemies as possible. This kind of movement freedom is something that ranged characters simply do not have. If enemies decide to split up, a melee character is kind of going to suffer from the consequences. Meanwhile, a ranged character like Phoebe or Carlotta doesn't get as many negatives from this. So it doesn't really matter where the enemy goes, because Carlotta's sights on the enemy never waver. This also leads me straight into my next point, being the fact that Carlotta is an incredibly easy character to pilot. Carlotta actually has one of the safest and easiest rotations in the entire game, and this comes down to a couple of factors. First of all, the fact that during almost all of her attacks, enemies are frozen. And I don't mean literally frozen, more like they are frozen in place. For example, during Carlotta's skill, which has 2 stages, the first stage will be capable of freezing enemies in place for around 2 seconds. And then during the second stage of Carlotta's skill, she moves towards them. But because the enemies are frozen in place, you are at no risk of being hit during any part of the skill animation. There's also Carlotta's enhanced heavy attack, which will also have a similar effect on enemies. Meaning that even during this long animation, Carlotta is in absolutely no danger. So that leaves only one moment at which Carlotta could realistically be hit, being the time during her ultimate rotation. However, after every single death knell, Carlotta is able to shift her position, being able to move out of harm's way if the enemy decides to attack her. Which means that not only are enemies frozen when you're not in your ultimate, when you are in your ultimate, you're capable of basically just moving away from whatever the enemy is cooking. And even if you're fighting a mobile enemy that's able to chase you down, usually they won't be able to chase you down for long enough for you to actually be in any kind of danger for any sort of long period of time. Carlotta also isn't forced to use her dodge counter, because during her Resonance Liberation, you can simply use the Liberation button instead of basic attacks to completely remove the possibility of using your dodge counter, meaning that Carlotta gets absolutely zero punishment from dodging enemies. Moving on to the next point for Carlotta, which is the fact that even if you do not own her signature weapon, she is going to perform completely fine on Static Mist. Now, normally I wouldn't really say this is a big deal, because I recommend getting the signature weapon for every DPS in the game. But as of recent, characters feel like they have been kind of bricks on standard weapons. Frolova is by far the best example of this, getting a 40% damage increase simply by pulling for her signature weapon. And characters like Brant, Lupa, and Carlotta are also getting very big increases from their signature. Meanwhile, comparatively, Carlotta's signature is not as needed for her damage output. Going from her signature to Static Mist is only a 16% damage loss, and it will also boost up the next character you swap into after Carlotta's rotation is over, which provides a little bit of team utility. Obviously, there are other characters that are pretty similar in this regard. For example, Phoebe and Camellia, but a lot of characters during 2.0 feel like that without their signature, they are really suffering, and I'm just gonna give Carlotta props for not being one of those. And combined with the next point, this means that Carlotta is a pretty safe investment even if you're early on in the game. Because the next point is that Carlotta has a very large teammate selection that you can pick from depending on whatever level of investment your account is currently at. Obviously, Carlotta has her best-in-slot teammate, being with Zhezha. Zhezha obviously has perfect synergy with Carlotta due to her outro skill being literally perfect for Carlotta's primarily skill damage based kit, that is also entirely glacial damage. Zhezha also gives Carlotta an additional 15 energy that removes the entire need for energy regen on your Carlotta's substats, meaning that Zhezha is obviously the best in slot character to run with Carlotta. But that's not the end of it, because Carlotta also has multiple other teammate selections, ranging from other 5-stars to 4-star characters as well. The second best in slot with her would be Brant. Now, I've already sung Brant's praises a lot pretty recently due to him being on the current banner, so I don't want to stick around on him for too long. But Brant has some of the highest personal damage out of any sub DPS in the game, to the point where running him as a main DPS is really not a bad idea. He actually has the highest damage output of any sub DPS in the game at the moment. Brant also has a very good outro skill for Carlotta, having 25% resonance skill damage amplification, which, as I said, resonance skill is basically almost all of Carlotta's damage output. There's also Cantarella, who has the same outro skill, she just has less personal damage and a longer field time than Brant. So that's it for alternative 5-star options, but you also have F2P options, being Yang Yang and Taucha primarily. Yang Yang has one of the shortest rotations in the entire game. Not many people know this, but Yang Yang's rotation can be shortened to a point to where she is comparable to Thundah, which is an amazing achievement, I'll just say that. Yang Yang also has some very good personal damage when you consider that her field time is very close to that of Thundah. In fact, at S6, she has a higher damage output. But that's not where all the benefits of Yang Yang end, because she also has energy regeneration on her outro skill, which is even more than Zhezha, which, like I said before with Zhezha, entirely annihilates any sort of need to get energy regen on your substats, which can be a pretty major damage increase for Carlotta. Taucha is another free-to-play option. She trades fast rotations and damage output for just having way more buffing. Taucha has 38% resonance skill damage amplification on her outro skill, making Taucha one of the best buffers when it comes to simply buffing up your Carlotta as much as possible, being even better than the likes of Brant or Cantarella. What holds her back is primarily the fact that her rotation is much longer than any of the other characters I mentioned previously, but she still finds herself being competitive with Yang Yang because she just has that much more buffing. And that brings me to Carlotta's only real negative, which is the fact that, for certain content, Carlotta's AoE can be quite lacking. As I said before, Carlotta isn't really that good when it comes to AoE, because most of Carlotta's damage output is in a straight line in front of her. You are able to minimize the issue by simply learning how to position your Carlotta correctly, hitting as many enemies as possible just by being at the right place for the correct enemies. However, this doesn't always work, because some spawn patterns in Tower of Adversity, or some events, will have the enemies spawn way more spread out than, for example, when they all cluster together in Whimpering Wastes. Meaning that, when it comes to certain types of AoE content, you definitely will feel the fact that Carlotta's AoE is a lot worse than some other 2.0 characters, like Frolova or Phoebe. But considering the fact that her AoE is still good enough to work in Whimpering Wastes, just goes to show to me that this character is not to be messed with. But that's just my opinion on Carlotta. Let me know what you think of her in the comments down below. If you liked this video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Additionally, let me know in the comments if you're pulling for Carlotta. If you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord server, which is linked in the description below. If you just want to see more of me, be sure to check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. I primarily talk about PGR, but I kinda just make videos about whatever I feel like. But that'll be all from me. Peace.